Soaps were made with animal fat. These days, we've got a crazy amount of soap choices to suit everyone's fancy. It's like a soap paradise. But back in the Wild West, they didn't have all that. Their soap was pretty basic, made from animal fat, lye, water, and some herbs for smell and extra effects. Yeah, it might sound kinda weird washing with animal fat soap, but hey, that's just how they rolled back then. Lard soap, whiskey, and pencils were all used in women's hair. In the Wild West, hair care was a whole different ballgame. No fancy shampoos, just plain lard and lye soap bars, no frills, just function. And get this, some folks went bold with a mix of whiskey and castor oil for a wild hair cocktail. Can you picture slathering all that in your hair? And styling? Well, ladies back then got creative with pencils, winding their hair around them for that curly, cute look. It was a real hair adventure back then. Barbers were often sought out for advice on grooming habits. Back in the Old West, barbers were like the OG influencers, doling out advice on more than just haircuts. They pushed personal cleanliness for comfort and health, but some of their ideas, like iffy lotions and powders, weren't spot on. Still, folks looked up to them, and even the ladies wanted their beauty tips. Oral hygiene consisted of pliers and whiskey. Back in the day, taking care of your teeth wasn't exactly a top priority. Toothbrushes were like luxury items, and most people didn't really think too much about brushing. But it gets even crazier. When folks had dental problems like cavities or root canals, the solution wasn't exactly high-tech. Get this, they'd turn to barbers or even blacksmiths to play dentist and yank out the troublesome tooth with whatever tools they had lying around. And as for pain relief, well, a good old swig of whiskey was the best they could do. The filthy truth behind Hoover Dam's transformation. In an old picture, we see the Colorado River near the Hoover Dam before it got tamed. But under the water, things were pretty gross. Back in the old days, the river was really dirty. Pollution from things like mining, factories, and bad garbage dumping made the water all yucky. People who used it for drinking, washing, and farming got sick because the water was so bad. The not-so-fresh reality of cowboys and their horses. When we think about cowboys, we picture these tough, rough-and-tumble folks who are super close to their trusty horses. They roam big landscapes, go on crazy adventures, and you'd think their partnership is legendary. But let's be real, behind all the cool cowboy stuff, there's a less fancy side. Cowboys, who weren't exactly known for taking regular showers, unintentionally gave their beloved horses the same treatment. So, as they both covered long distances, keeping clean was pretty low on the priority list. Apparently, when these cowboys rolled into town after a long ride, they brought with them a powerful and unmistakable scent that filled the air. Germs and health risks were everywhere. Imagine this, a bunch of courageous frontiersmen and daring pioneers setting out on an epic journey to conquer the wild, wild West. But guess what? They had no clue that with each step they took, they were carrying germs. As they roamed across vast landscapes and met new communities, these explorers unknowingly spread bacteria and viruses from one corner of the frontier to another. And since they didn't have much of a clue about medicine, diseases went wild. Things like the flu, measles, and tuberculosis, just to name a few, wreaked havoc everywhere. Add to that the fact that proper sanitation and hygiene weren't really a thing, and you've got a germy disaster. The Wild West's obsession with chewing tobacco and spitting. Back in the Wild West, people chewed tobacco not just as a bad habit, but because it helped with the dryness from being out in dusty fields all day. The chewing kept their mouths moist and comfortable. But it also led to a lot of spitting, which wasn't very pleasant. People spit so much it had to be outlawed. Back in the Wild West saloons, it was totally normal to see guys spitting tobacco on the floor. They had these fancy-sounding spittoons and cuspidors around the bar to catch the spit. But honestly, it didn't really fix the issue. They even threw sawdust on the floor to soak it up. But all that did was create a germ playground. It turned into a breeding ground for nasty stuff like pneumonia and tuberculosis. And get this, if you stayed the night in one of these places, you were basically snoozing in the middle of this unclean mess. Some places even went so far as to make spitting illegal, especially at train stations, and they slapped you with big fines or even jail time to stop this unsanitary habit. Transmitted infections were rampant. In saloons and brothels of the Old West, there was a mix of desire and danger. The pretty ladies there had a hidden risk, venereal diseases, which are contagious infections. Shockingly, about half of the adults who worked in these places had these infections, and they used risky treatments like mercury and boric acid, which made things even worse. This meant that these infections spread really fast among the entertainers and their customers. We don't really know how bad it got, because death records often didn't say what caused it. The truth is, life was tough for sex workers and their clients in the Old West, where staying healthy was a luxury not many could afford. Alcohol was used as a cure for illnesses. Back in the old days, there weren't many doctors or medicine stores around, so people had to get clever to stay healthy. They tried all kinds of strange cures and magic potions to feel better. Plus, cleanliness wasn't a big deal back then. People often had dusty clothes, didn't bathe much, and looked a bit messy. They even used alcoholic drinks to calm down. Basically, staying healthy was a bit of a struggle because life wasn't very clean, and sometimes having a drink was seen as a way to deal with being sick. Men were way dirtier than women. In the Wild West, staying clean was tough. Water was scarce, so most people were lucky if they could take a bath once a week. But guess what? Women were the hygiene champions back then. They had indoor chores that gave them better access to water, so they stayed cleaner. Meanwhile, the guys worked outside, fighting dust and dirt without getting to wash often. So, being a man in those days probably meant being dirty and smelly most of the time. Thanks for joining us on this journey, untamed hygiene practices of the Wild West. We hope you've gained some fascinating insights into the ways people maintain their cleanliness in such challenging times. Remember, while we may not be living